Hello everybody, it's time to talk philosophy, and today's topic is free will. Do we have free will? We all assume we do, but can we prove it? And what is it? And is it possible that we could feel like we have free will and not really have it? That is the position of the hard determinist. And we are going to talk about it. We are going to do the checklist for the essay Free Will or Determinism by Cahn. And our question is very simple. Step 1 on the checklist, do we have free will? Then in step 2, we have to define our terms. Well, this is where it gets a little trickier than most essays because we have 3 different theories: hard determinism, soft determinism, and libertarianism. Each of these theories are going to have a different definition of free will. And you need to know each theory, the name of the theory, what the theory is, and their definition of free will. We are going to use hard determinism as our main theory, and we're going to do steps 1 through 4 with hard determinism. Then we're going to do 2, 5, and 6s. One with soft determinism and a response, and one with hard determinism and libertarianism and a response. Okay? So again, we're using hard determinism for steps 1 through 4. So the question is, do we have free will? Number 1, define terms. Free will, according to the hard determinist, is if it's within your power to do something and within your power not to do something, that is free will. Meaning, no matter what, if I have the power to raise my hand or not raise my hand, that's free will. The power is the individual's to do or not to do. Ironically, hard determinists don't think you have that power, but that is their definition of free will. The soft determinists have a different definition. They define free will if it's based on a psychological desire. So if I want to raise my hand and I raise my hand, that's free will. That is not the same thing as the hard determinist definition. It's based on following through on a psychological desire. So if I want to do this and I do this, that's free will. It makes no comments about why you want to do what you want to do, which we'll get into farther in the checklist. So, hard determinism. It's within the person's power to do it and within the person's power not to do it, that's free will. Soft determinism. If it's based on a psychological desire, if I want to do it and can do it, that's free will. Libertarians have the same definition of free will as the hard determinists. But libertarians are going to say that we do have free will. Alright. Step 3. How do we answer the question? Do you have free will? According to the hard determinist, no, we do not have free will. We may feel like we have free will, but that's not the same thing as saying that we actually have it. Okay. Then, step 4. What is their argument? Well, the specific argument they have is straight from the book. So I'll give you the actual argument and then we'll talk about it for a minute. So, premise 1. No action is free if it must occur. That's a reference to their definition of free will. No action is free if it must occur. So if it must occur, it cannot be free. Premise 2. In the case of every event that occurs, previous biological and environmental conditions, known or unknown, ensure the event's occurrence. I know it's wordy. The second premise is known as determinism. And it's going to say biological and environmental conditions basically cause you to do everything you do. So, if you think of programming, in psych class or psychiatry, you would talk about environmental conditions and you talk about biological conditions. Determinism has them both. Basically, the combination of biological and environmental conditions causing you the desire to do whatever it is you do. And you are not in control of your biological and environmental conditions. So you are not in control of what you do. And going back to our actual argument conclusion, humans do not have free will. Let me do this again. Premise 1, no action is free if it must occur. Premise 2, in the case of every event, biological and environmental conditions known and unknown ensure the event's occurrence. That premise alone is called determinism. Conclusion, no action is free. Basically, humans do not have free will. So, why do they say biological, environmental conditions, known or unknown? You don't have to remember. What would be an example of what determinism means? So let's say, and this is a true story, so every time I see a pink balloon, I smile. I see one and I smile. I like pink balloons. Don't know why I like pink balloons, I just like them. Well, actually I do now, but I'll get to that. So, is the fact that I smile at pink balloons because I like pink balloons a free act? Well, based on hard determinism, and that's what we're arguing now, biological and environmental conditions, known or unknown, ensure the event's occurrence. So there's something either biologically hardwired in me to like pink balloons, or there are some kind of environmental conditions in my past that make me like pink balloons. It's why I smile, it's why I like them, and I don't have control of that. So I feel like I have free will. When I see a pink balloon, I smile. I feel free when I smile. I smile because I like the pink balloons. Under hard determinism, it feels free, but it's not free. So then, the real story is, so one day, I'm eating lunch with my sister. I see pink balloons. I smile. I look at Joanne, I'm like, I have no idea why I always like pink balloons, but I do. I just like them. And Joanne looks at me and she says, really? You don't know why you like pink balloons? And I said, no, do you? She's like, yes, I know why you like pink balloons. And I'm like, okay, tell me. And apparently when I was 3 years old, an age so young that I don't remember it, my mother's best friend showed up for my birthday with a ton load of helium pink balloons, enough to fill the entire living room. So they filled the living room with pink balloons and let me play. So apparently, imagine the 3-year-old with a room filled with pink helium balloons. I had a blast, and I don't remember it, but if the hard determinist is right, the reason I like pink balloons, and I smile to this day, is because even though I don't remember it, when I was 3 years old, I had a wonderful experience with pink balloons, and that's why I like them. It doesn't matter, before my sister told me the story, I didn't know why I liked pink balloons, I just liked them. So I don't even have to know what the environmental or biological cause is. So basically, your environmental and your biological conditions kind of create in you programming for what you like and dislike, what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And the feeling that you can do it makes you think you're free. But just because you feel free doesn't mean you actually are free. According to hard determinists, you are not free. Your biological environmental conditions have created in you who you are, and you follow that programming, kind of like a computer. And it doesn't matter whether you remember the pink balloons or you don't remember the pink balloons, it's there. And they tell the story of Leopold and Loeb. Hard determinism was a theory originally created by a really good lawyer. This was back in the 20s? It was a long time ago. You read it in the essay. So there was 2 teenage boys, Leopold and Loeb, and they had bad childhoods. And they both had biological conditions. One was psychotic, one had a, what do you call it? I don't know if there's a name for it. Fear of girls, women. I mean, just terrified of them. So when he was a kid, both of their parents were wealthy. So they came from wealthy families. And unfortunately for them, their parents taught them that money made them better than other people. So they, right off the bat, they had a superiority complex. But both of them also had an inferiority complex, because even though their parents told them they were superior based on money, they didn't feel superior, either one of them. They both had serious issues going on. And the kid who was deathly afraid of girls, the parents decided to cure him of being afraid of girls by sending him to an all-girls boarding school. The idea, I'm assuming, was if he's only around girls, he's going to have to get over it. This, not surprisingly, backfired. It did not help this kid. So now, fast forward, you've got Leopold. The other one, I forgot whether it's Leopold or Loeb, had a sadistic nanny. Just a nanny being babysitter, what's au pair, any of the terms. She's a live-in person that cared for this kid. And she was sadistic, so she basically made his life miserable and unhappy. So you have these kids, and they both have biological issues, and they both have environmental issues, and they become best friends. And basically, they decide to do some minor crimes. They shoplifted, and they got away with it. And then when they get away with it, they get a boost and say, hey, we really are superior, we feel so good, we got away with this. And then it escalates and they try to do something a little more. They eventually decide they're going to kill one of their 14-year-old cousins, which unfortunately for everyone they do. Now they've killed this kid, and they immediately get caught. Their dreams of being hardened criminals. They got caught, they got taken to jail, and they both confessed. So now you have these kids in jail. They both confessed. This is the 20s. There is death penalty, and there is no insanity plea at the time in this country. So they can't plead insanity. They have the death penalty, and they have confessions. So at this point, they're in bad shape. The parents hired the best lawyer that money can buy at the time, a man named Clarence Darrow, who comes up with a defense. And that defense we now call hard determinism. And he's basically going to argue these kids were not responsible for their actions. Based on biological and environmental conditions, they were basically programmed to do what they did. They did not have control. And he, at the time, would have considered a success keeping them out of death row, of which he did. Now, this whole line of argument is what we call hard determinism, and it's the one we just went over. And basically it's saying if Leopold and Loeb did not have free will based on their environmental and biological conditions, what does that say about the rest of us? We don't have control either. We feel like we have control. But feeling like you have control and actually having control, having the power, talked about in the definition. I have the power to choose to raise my hand or not to raise my hand. I could feel like I have the power and not really have the power. I am conditioned based on biological environmental conditions to want to raise my hand. I raise my hand, I feel like I have that power, but I don't really have that power because it was programmed based on my biological and environmental history. That is the case of hard determinism. And it's a strong case. If you start asking yourself, why do I do what I do? You will always come back to biological and environmental conditions. Take some kind of simple decision. You're all students. Say, why am I a student? Ask yourself why. And just keep asking yourself why until you try to figure out why you are in this class. And it will come back to environmental conditions. Or I'm not sure what biological conditions would make you take philosophy, but I'm sure they exist. Anyway, so That is the case of hard determinism. And it says we don't have free will. What we have is the feeling of free will. Now, we have two opposing viewpoints we're going to use. The first one we're going to do at step 5 is called soft determinism. And soft determinism rejects premise 1 of the hard determinist argument. So it rejects hard determinist definition of free will. And they're going to say an action is free if it's based on psychological desire. So if I want to raise my hand and I raise my hand, that's free will. And if it's based on psychological desire, it's free. Now, the psychological desire is still programmed by your biological environmental history. But for the soft determinist, that doesn't matter. What matters is it feels free, therefore it is free. This is what we call a free act. In everyday life, I want to raise my hand and I raise my hand, that's a free act. They make a case, and in the essay, it's called a paradigm. Paradigm just means a key example. And basically they're saying, I can give you an example of free act. I want to raise my hand, I raise my hand. It's free. It's a standard example of a free act. And if I can give you a standard example, then I've proven what a free act is. The example they use for this is a piece of wood. Let's say I don't know what solid is. And for some reason you show up in my office with a piece of wood. And I say, you know, I was wondering what the word solid meant. And you handed me the piece of wood and say, hey, this is solid. And I look at it and I bend it, it doesn't bend, and I try to put my hand through it and I can't see through it. And I now know what solid is, because you gave me a standard example of what solid is. Now I know what solid is. But if we look at that piece of wood through a microscope, a really, really strong microscope, the wood is not going to look solid anymore. It's going to look like tiny little atoms smushed together. And if you've ever seen an atom, you've got the nucleus and the electron and the proton, and it's basically a little ball with 3 dots in it. It's going to look like a swirling mass of nothingness. That wood no longer looks solid. But in everyday life, it's what we call solid. Now use that analogy and let's compare it to free will. I want to raise my hand, I raise my hand. According to soft determinists, that's a standard example of free will. What they call is a paradigm in the essay. And I now know what free will is because I just had a standard example of it. Just like I know what solid is because someone gave me a standard example of a solid, which is a piece of wood. Now if I examine my actions of raising my hand under the lens of hard determinism, and I say, well, why did you raise your hand? And I said, well, I raised my hand because I want to give an example to my students so they understand the theories in this essay and the definitions. And they said, well, why did you do that? And I said, because I'm a teacher. And they said, well, why did you become a teacher? And I go back to my school days and why I picked my career and on and on and on. That's all based on environmental conditions. And some of it could be biological. Well, why did you like the classes you liked? Well, maybe that just happened to be what I was good at, and then I liked it. So the combination of biological and environmental conditions created in me an urge to become a teacher and teach philosophy because I liked it. And now I'm sitting here and I'm raising my hand as an example. Does it still look like a free act? Not so much anymore. My environmental and biological conditions basically led me to the point that I'm at now, which is to give you an example. Do I have any control over the fact that I'm going to give you a good example? According to hard determinism, no. So that example, that standard example, no longer looks free. But in everyday life, it's what we call a free act. That's the soft determinist argument. just like a piece of wood is solid, in everyday life, this is a standard example of what solid means. Now, if you look at it closely, like a microscope, it may no longer look like solid, but in everyday life, it's solid. This is the same argument they're going to use for free will. In everyday life, I want to raise my hand, and I raise my hand as a free act. If I delve into it closely and examine my reasonings for it, it may no longer look free. But in everyday life, we still call it a free act. That's a soft determinist argument. Okay? Now, if you were in front of me, I'd ask you who likes which argument better. Think about it, talk about it online, and we're going to move on to step 6. If you were the hard determinist, what would you say is the flaw in the soft determinist argument? The example used in the book. Just because you give a standard example of something doesn't actually prove that thing. They base this whole argument on, if you can give a standard example, then you prove that thing. Just like you prove what solid is by giving a standard example of a piece of wood. Well, let's say there's a small town, and everybody in that small town thinks that you are a witch if you were born on May 30th. I was born on May 30th. So you come into the small town and they say, hey, have you met Professor Guest? She's great. She is the most wonderful witch you'll ever meet. And what are you then thinking? Are you thinking, oh, she must have been born on May 30th? No, just because everybody in the town takes that as a standard definition of a witch doesn't make me a witch. So, that is the comeback, and that is the argument against self-determinism, the flaw. And that is the first checklist we've done. So we used hard determinism in steps 1 through 4, we used soft determinism in step 5, and we have the response in step 6. Now, we're going to do a second 5 and a second 6 under libertarianism. Libertarianism is also going to reject hard determinism, but instead of rejecting the first premise, they are going to reject the second premise, which is known as determinism. In the case of every event, biological and environmental conditions, known or unknown, ensure the event's occurrence. So, the libertarian will reject determinism. And determinism is basically the laws of cause and effect. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. You will all remember this from logic section. Life follows the laws of cause and effect. Determinism is about the laws of cause and effect. If you reject cause and effect, then you would then have the power to raise your hand. I'm no longer controlled by my biological and environmental conditions. I have the power to choose to raise my hand or not. Yay! Me. Okay, so libertarians are going to reject determinism and accept hard determinism's definition of free will. So why do they think they're correct? So you ask the libertarian, okay, so you reject determinism. Yes. How do you prove that you have free will? They're like, okay, I raised my hand. I just proved it. You're like, okay, that's not enough. You have to give me more proof. And the libertarian will raise their hand again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And at some point you say, libertarian, just raising your hand isn't enough. You have to prove to me you have free will. And the libertarian looks at you and says, no, I do not. I do not have to prove to you I have free will. It is self-evident. In life, there are some things that are self-evident. You know it because you live it. I live it. I live having free will. I know I have free will. It is self-evident to me. Therefore, I do not need to prove it to you. The end. That is the libertarian argument. It's self-evident. It's one of those things in life that's self-evident because I live it. I don't have to prove it beyond that. How many of you are going, go libertarian? Okay, so you think the hard determinist is going to accept this? It's philosophy. No, we're going to analyze everything. So what would be step 6 to respond to the libertarian? Where is the flaw in that argument? Well, calling something self-evident doesn't actually do anything. just because it's self-evident to you doesn't mean it's self-evident to me, because it could be that it feels self-evident to you because you feel like you have free will, like the hard determinist says, but you don't actually have it. So what you call self-evident could just be the feeling of free will, but not the proof of it. And that is the essay, Free Will or Determinism by Cahn. I hope that this has helped you. It's an interesting topic because generally most people assume you have free will, and then you start delving into the issues and trying to prove it, and it's a lot harder than you think. And it's much harder to disprove hard determinism than most people would like. So I want you to think about it. I want you to talk about it on the discussion boards, and we will go from there. Have a good day.